So I am very excited to have David Barron here tonight. And please hold your questions until the end. He's going to allow quite a bit of time for questions. So please enjoy the talk about American Eclipse. Thank you.
Well, I'm hiding for a second. So here's the previous book of mine with the pretty mountain on the cover. But that was a great story. I was wondering how Jana knew about my new book because it was a secret for a long time. And so Jana was the first person to invite me to give a book talk for my new book. This is the first talk of my book tour. In fact, and you are the first audience to see my new book, which is not available in stores yet. So it officially goes on sale June 6th, although there will be one opportunity to get it early, and I can talk about that later. But so it was back in October that Jana contacted me, and when I had just started to reveal what my new book was about, and I was surprised, pleasantly so, to get invited. And I'm glad that you gave the $80 back to me. This is, in essence, a sneak preview of my book that's not yet out. But first, let me ask you all a question. Who has plans for August 21st? Okay, who all will be in Wyoming on that day? Who all will be in Nebraska? Who's going to be in Colorado? All right, I'm going to change your mind. So, for those of you who don't know, on August 21st of this year, a total solar eclipse will cross the United States from coast to coast for the first time in 99 years. This is a big deal. NASA expects it to be the biggest public event in space science since the moon landing. And as for me, I've known what I would be doing on August 21st of 2017 for 19 years. And that's how long I've been planning my new book. And in fact, the story of how it all came about goes back even farther than that. And I will get to some slides, but first let me just sort of give a preamble. So back in 1994, I was a science correspondent for NPR. Back in the 90s, I worked for NPR. And in 94, in May, there was a solar eclipse, a partial solar eclipse, that was set to cross the United States. So I interviewed an astronomer about it, and he explained what was interesting and how to view it, but he also emphasized that, you know, there's an enormous difference between a partial solar eclipse and a much rarer total solar eclipse, which he described as the grandest spectacle in all of nature. And the astronomer then gave me a piece of advice that literally changed my life. He said to me, before you die, you owe it to yourself to experience a total solar eclipse. And that was pretty strong language. And I took it seriously. And the thing about total eclipses, though, is if you wait for one to come to you, you're going to be waiting a very long time, because any given point on Earth experiences a total solar eclipse once every 400 years or so. But if you're willing to travel, you don't have to wait quite that long. And I did a little bit of research and discovered that a few years later, in 1998, a total solar eclipse was going to cross the Caribbean. Now, a total eclipse is only visible in a narrow path, about 100 miles wide, where the moon's shadow falls, and that's called the path of totality. And in February of 1998, the path of totality crossed Aruba. And I figured, well, February, Aruba, didn't sound like a bad idea anyway, so I went to Aruba to see what would happen. And February 26th found me out behind the Hyatt Regency with a whole crowd of people waiting for the show to begin. And I had with me my handy eclipse glasses with cardboard frames and really dark lenses that enable you to look safely at the sun. And a total eclipse begins as a partial eclipse. And let me just check, can everyone hear me all right? Okay. So a total eclipse begins as a partial eclipse, as the moon slowly makes its way in front of the sun. And looking through my eclipse glasses, first I could see that there was a bite carved out of the edge of the sun, and over time the bite grew larger and larger, and soon the sun became a crescent, and it was all very interesting, but I still didn't understand why this was something I had to see before I died. Well, about 10 minutes before the onset of the total eclipse, weird things started to happen. So first, just the quality of daylight changed. Colors looked different. Shadows looked sharper. It was as if someone had turned up the contrast knob on TV. And a cool wind kicked up. And then I noticed, looking under the palm trees, that where light was dappling the ground, instead of little points of light, there were tiny crescents, because the spaces between the leaves were acting as pinhole cameras, projecting onto the sand images of the crescent sun. And then I looked offshore and I could see running lights on boats, so I realized it was getting dark. I hadn't realized how dark it was getting, and then soon it was obvious that it was getting dark. It was almost as if I was losing my eyesight. And all of a sudden, the lights went out. And at that point, this cheer erupts from the beach. And I took off my eclipse glasses because this is the only time it is safe to look at the sun with the naked eye, and that's during the total phase of a total eclipse. I took off my eclipse glasses, and I looked up in the sky, and I was just dumbfounded. Because, at this point I was in my mid-30s. I had lived on Earth long enough to know what the sky looks like. I'd seen blue skies, and gray skies, and starry skies, and angry skies, and pink skies at sunrise. But this was a sky I had never seen. So first, there were the colors. So overhead, it was twilight, in the middle of the afternoon, a deep purple gray. And on the horizon, it was orange, like sunset, 360 degrees all around. And overhead, in the twilight, bright stars and planets had come out. So there was Mercury, and there was Jupiter, and there was Venus, all in a line, and along that line was this thing, this glorious, bewildering thing. It looked like a wreath woven from silvery thread. It was just shimmering out there in space. And that was the sun's outer atmosphere, the solar corona. And pictures just don't do it justice, because it's not just a halo or a ring around the sun. It's finely textured. It's like it's made out of strands of silk. And although it looked nothing like any sun I'd ever seen, I knew that that was the sun. And so there was the sun, and there were the planets, and it was as if I had left our solar system and was looking back at creation. And it all made sense. I could see how the planets go around the sun. And it was, for the first time in my life, I just felt this visceral connection to the universe. It was, I think, what they call nirvana. And it lasted for all of 174 seconds, less than 3 minutes. Because at that point, it all ended. The sun burst out, the blue sky returned, the corona and the stars and the planets were gone, and it felt like I had briefly stepped through the back of the wardrobe into this fantasy world, and now I'd been yanked back to reality. Well, I got hooked, as a lot of people do. And that's when I became an eclipse chaser. And so now, every couple of years, I head off to some remote part of the Earth, usually, to go stand in the shadow of the moon for another 2 or 3 minutes and relive that experience. And it was on that beach in Aruba, right after totality, that I decided I was going to write a book about eclipse chasing. But I knew in 1998 that that was not the time to write the book, because if ever Americans were going to care about eclipses, it was in the summer of 2017. So I put the project on hold. I wrote another book and went back to radio, but I always had it in the back of my mind that in the summer of 2017 I was coming out with my eclipse book, and so I kept an eye out for a good story to tell, an eclipse story that was worthy of a book that had never been told. And that's the story I want to tell you tonight. It so happens that the story that I found is set in our part of the world. And those of us who live in the American West know that this is a landscape filled with history and with legends. The gunfight at the OK Corral, the Battle of the Little Bighorn, Buffalo Bill, Calamity Jane. It's sometimes hard to distinguish where fact ends and fiction begins. Well, 6 years ago, I came across a particularly puzzling tale from the Old West. Now, north of Colorado, if you go to Wyoming and drive over the Laramie Plains, then cross the snowy range of the Medicine Bow Mountains, you'll come to the Sierra Madres. And that's where you'll find Battle Lake, set against a slope of granite and spruce. And on the shoulder of State Highway 70, you'll see a historical mark. And here's what it says. Thomas A. Edison camped near this spot in 1878 while on a fishing trip. It was here that his attention was directed to the fiber from his bamboo fishing pole, which he tested as a suitable filament for his incandescent electric lamp. Well, this I thought was intriguing. The claim, put more plainly elsewhere, is that it was here in Wyoming that Edison, in a flash of inspiration, devised his light bulb. Well, I wanted to know, is that true? Well, what better place to look than True West magazine? And indeed, back in the 1960s, they ran an article on this. It's a fact that Edison came to Wyoming in 1878, just before he invented the light bulb. He did go fishing at Battle Lake. And what brought him to Wyoming, he was in the West with a bunch of astronomers, and they had come to observe a total solar eclipse. Now, that is Edison, second from the right. And so I decided to look into this, to delve into the archives, to go back in time, to learn why Edison came out here for the eclipse. Who were his companions? Why was the eclipse so important? And what lasting impact did it have? And so let me say right off the bat that the light bulb story is legend. Edison did not invent the incandescent lamp in Wyoming. But the true story is no less compelling. As I discovered, and as I write in my book, Edison and others who came west in 1878 did change America in some profound ways. And the eclipse was the catalyst. So let me tell you the true story of Edison and other scientists who raced to the American frontier for the total solar eclipse of 1878. First, a little bit of context. In 1878, the general outlines of modern America were already in place. Our national borders looked like they do today. The Civil War was over. The nation had 38 states. The most recent addition, in fact, was Colorado. We were a vibrant, can-do nation, population 50 million and growing fast. We were building big cities and we were spreading west. The mindset, the rallying cry was manifest destiny. The Transcontinental Railroad had recently been completed, opening new territory to settlement and sparking clashes between the pioneers and Native Americans who found their land and way of life threatened. We were a rapidly developing adolescent nation. We had just celebrated our 100th birthday, and we were, you might say, intellectually immature. Europe was the center of Western culture, the place where respectable literature and music and art was produced. And Europe led the world in science. In fact, Europe led the world in chasing eclipses. So let me first get a few basics out of the way. A solar eclipse occurs, of course, when the moon passes between the Earth and the sun, and so the moon casts its shadow on the Earth. Now, there are actually two parts to the moon's shadow, and I'm going to zoom in on this area right here. This outer portion we see here with the dashed line, that's a zone of partial shadow. Anyone in that zone will see a partial solar eclipse. That dark dot in the middle, and this outer portion is called the penumbra. this inner portion is the umbra. That's the dark shadow of the moon. And only there, in that dark spot, do you experience a total solar eclipse. But the shadow is moving at about 2,000 miles an hour across the Earth. So it actually traces out a line, like you see here, you can see at the bottom. So that is the path of totality of this particular eclipse. That's where the moon's shadow falls. Now, total solar eclipses occur about once every 18 months, somewhere on the planet. So over time, they trace out paths like this, almost like spaghetti thrown in a map. These are the tracks of total solar eclipses from 1842 to 1893. You can see how they snake across the globe. And this is a particularly interesting period because the mid to late 1800s has been called, in fact, the golden age of eclipse expeditions. This was a time when total eclipses were not merely natural spectacles to marvel at, but they were in fact keenly important for science. Astronomers were just starting to unravel the mysteries of the sun. What is this great ball of fire at the center of our solar system? What is it made of? What fuels it? And there were certain studies of the sun that could only be done during those brief few minutes of a total solar eclipse. During a total eclipse, the super bright surface of the sun is covered by the moon, which allows you to see what's around the sun, these flame-like features called prominences, and the ethereal corona outside of it. Now, to understand how scientists took advantage of eclipses, you have to go back even earlier to the 17th century. Isaac Newton, back then, passed white light through a prism, and he showed that it gets split into a rainbow, a spectrum of colors. Later, other scientists found that if you use a prism to look at the light given off by a hot gas, and you may remember this from your high school chemistry classes using Bunsen burners, you'll find that the light, the spectrum of that light contains specific bright lines, and these will tell you what chemical elements are in that gas. So by the mid-19th century, astronomers realized they could use this technique to figure out the chemical elements in the heavens. So they fitted their telescopes with prisms, creating spectroscopes. And they trained these spectroscopes on the outer portions of the sun during total eclipses. They could look at what lines showed up in the spectrum to determine what elements were in those parts of the sun. So during this era, whenever a total eclipse was predicted, such as this one across India in 1871, astronomers took their equipment and headed off to sit in the path of totality. They'd hope that clouds didn't show up, and they'd frantically conduct their experiments in those 2 or 3 minutes of midday darkness. And this is a British team in India in 1871. Now, the United States did launch some eclipse expeditions too, but the Europeans were the leaders. That is, until 1878, when the moon's shadow was sent to visit our own backyard. The date was July 29, 1878, and the path of totality ran right down the American frontier from Montana Territory to Texas and Louisiana. So this was America's chance to shine, or an opportunity to slip up and embarrass ourselves. If all went well, we would show the rest of the world what we were capable of as a scientific nation. And so the eclipse was a big national undertaking. The US government issued official instructions for observing the eclipse, how to view it safely, and how to collect information that could help astronomers. Now, the solar corona, what today we know is the sun's outer atmosphere, was a great mystery. Just characterizing its shape and size was important. So in an early form of crowdsourcing, federal scientists asked people who were artistically inclined to sketch the corona and submit their drawings to Washington. So the instructions included a template you could use and an example of what a proper drawing might look like, including contours of the inner and outer corona. Meanwhile, the government encouraged professional astronomers to go west for the eclipse. It offered logistical advice on railroad travel for those going privately, and the U.S. Naval Observatory put out the call for scientist volunteers to participate in a half-dozen government expeditions. And so as these invitations went out, the responses came back like RSVPs to a wedding invitation. The Cincinnati Observatory accepts the invitation. The Morrison Observatory accepts. Yale College accepts. Harvard sends its regrets. So the government assembled its scientific parties and dispatched them to the frontier to meet the moon's shadow. This is one Naval Observatory team in Colorado, you can see here. I don't know if anyone recognizes where this photograph was taken. As it says down here, this is in Central City. That is the roof of the Teller House Hotel. And that was used as an observing platform for this one band of astronomers. Denver was also in the path of totality, and that's where a team from Princeton camped out for a month preparing for the eclipse. To the north in Wyoming, this camp was established by the U.S. Naval Observatory right along the Transcontinental Railroad. You can see these tents set up, and this is a makeshift observatory with telescopes sticking out of the top and a canvas roof. And also in Wyoming, of course, was this group. So let's talk about this extraordinary collection of talent that gathered in the rough and tumble railroad town of Rawlins, Wyoming. And I'll mention just a few of these individuals. If we zoom in here on the right, again, that's Thomas Edison right there. And to the right over here, that is Norman Lockyer. He was a British astronomer, the man who famously identified the element helium in the sun before anyone had ever found it on Earth. And he was also the founding editor of the British journal Nature. On the far left here, that large gentleman is James Craig Watson. He was a professor at the University of Michigan, and this was his domain. The Detroit Observatory, which was in Ann Arbor. Watson was known as a planet hunter back in that era. If you actually look at a solar system chart from back in the 1800s, and like this one, this is from 1846, it's different from diagrams today. It's got more planets than you would expect. If you zoom in on the region between Mars and Jupiter, for instance, here's Mars, then you have Vesta, Juno, Ceres, Pallas, and Jupiter. Well, those are the asteroids. This is the asteroid belt. But back in the 1800s, finding asteroids was a big deal. They were considered planets. They were minor planets, as opposed to the major ones. But they got names just like any other planet. And also, if you were to, so I should say, James Craig Watson, his claim to fame was finding asteroids. And so that's why he was a planet. Well, if you zoom in closer to the sun, you'll note that between Mercury and the sun, there's another planet, Vulcan. Now, Vulcan at the time was a hypothetical planet. Many astronomers believed that it existed because Mercury's orbit didn't make sense otherwise. Mercury behaved as if there was some mass between it and the sun tugging it along. But no one had ever reliably seen Vulcan. Now, that was not a great surprise. It's so close to the sun that it would never be up in the nighttime, and you couldn't see it in the daytime because it would be lost in the glare of the sun. About the only time you might see Vulcan would be during those 2 or 3 minutes of midday darkness during a total eclipse. So James Craig Watson came on out to Wyoming with the express intention of finding Vulcan. Now, as for Thomas Edison, he was just 31 years old at the time, but he was already a global celebrity because of a recent invention. What's that? The phonograph. This simple contraption with a hand crank and tinfoil to record sound was an absolute sensation. Before the phonograph, no one even imagined that you could capture and release sound at will. Edison was hailed as a genius. He was called a wizard. And this was a period when Edison was working from his famous laboratory in Menlo Park, New Jersey. He was ridiculously productive and creative, dreaming up strange and wondrous inventions. There was the aerophone, an enormous loudspeaker that he suggested could be used in lighthouses to shout warnings at ships. This is the phonomotor, which used the power of the voice to turn a wheel. And there was this, the thermometer, which was an extremely sensitive heat detector, basically an electric thermometer that Edison claimed could measure changes as small as 1/1,000,000th of a degree Fahrenheit. Now today we would call the thermometer an infrared detector. It has this funnel that allows heat radiation to come in, impinge on this kind of stick of hard rubber, which then heats up, presses down here on this disk of carbon, which is connected to an electrical circuit, and the pressure on the carbon changes the conductivity of the circuit, and you can watch a needle deflect, which will show you that there's a change in temperature, that there's heat coming in. Now, an astronomer had encouraged Edison to create the thermometer, and in fact, several astronomers were keen to take them out to the west to use during the eclipse. They wanted to see if the solar corona gave off heat as well as light. And Edison decided in the end to come to Wyoming himself and do the experiment himself, to show that he was not just an inventor, but that he was a serious scientist. But these were not the most serious of surroundings. This was the Wild West, after all. And Edison ended up attaching his thermometer to a telescope and setting up his equipment in this thing here that looks like an outhouse, but it's actually a hen house. And that's Edison's telescope there. And that's where Edison spent the eclipse. Now, there were dozens of scientists who came west to observe the eclipse, and in my book I write about many of them, but the main characters I focus on are Edison, Watson, the planet hunter, and a third scientist who traveled to the frontier with very different intents. And this was Maria Mitchell, by far the best-known female scientist in America in the 19th century. She first came to prominence in 1847 when she discovered a comet and earned a gold medal from the King of Denmark. By 1878, she was working at Vassar, the first all-women's college in America. Now, no surprise, Mitchell was a staunch advocate for women's higher education. And this was a time when women's colleges were under attack. You see, in 1873, a sensational best-selling book came out that claimed college education could ruin a girl's health. It was written by a Harvard doctor, Edward H. Clark, who argued that by taxing the brain, education sapped energy from other parts of a girl's maturing body, including her reproductive organs. And you're laughing, but this was taken very seriously. And therefore, he said, higher learning could turn female college students into sterile, masculine invalids. He wrote that education could result in, quote, a dropping out of maternal instincts and an appearance of Amazonian coarseness and force. Such persons, he wrote, are analogous to the sexless class of termites. Well, Mitchell believed this was ridiculous. She encouraged young women to use their brains in her astronomy courses at Vassar. But that wasn't enough. She needed to convince American society that Dr. Clark's book was rubbish. So in 1878, she did something remarkable. As groups of men were assembling eclipse expeditions to Wyoming and Colorado, she assembled an all-female expedition. So this is the Vassar College Eclipse Party in Denver. And it wasn't just a scientific endeavor, it was, in essence, political theater, to demonstrate to a skeptical public that women could be smart, educated, healthy, and feminine to boot. So these three main characters of mine had a lot on the line. Edison was out to prove the value of his thermometer and to prove himself a scientist. Watson was out to find Vulcan and the glory that would come with discovering the planet, and Mitchell was out to change minds about the role of women in science and higher education. In this and other ways, the eclipse was a field of play, it was a competition, and the public followed closely the various competitors and what they were out to achieve. This country that was not known for embracing science suddenly cared about astronomy. Newspapers met the demand for information by providing extensive coverage. Here's the Chicago Tribune from a week before the eclipse. It offered a map of the path of totality, diagram, a star chart here, what stars and planets would be seen in the heavens during totality for those who were in the path. And the paper described what the scientists were up to. And although Chicago was outside the path of totality, people were keen to get a front row seat. So there were advertisements for eclipse tours. Just like today, the public headed to the path of totality. And the destination for most eclipse tourists was Denver. The city was overrun with visitors. The hotels ran out of rooms, so guests were left to sleep on cots in hotel parlors and dining rooms, and one gentleman reportedly slept on a billiard table. The public procured eclipse glasses. Now, there were no mass-produced glasses with mylar lenses like I've got here, but newsboys took shards of glass and smoked them over flames, and they collected pieces of colored glass. And this guy's holding a pane of blue glass, you can see, and they sold them on street corners. Here's your colored glass for seeing the eclipse, the newsboys cried. And mind you, this is verbatim from an 1878 article. Genuine French imported Nazarene blue, London smoke and bottle green, 3 kinds, 3 cents each or 2 for 5. Well, I have to say, immersing myself in this history was tremendous fun. Reading old newspapers and scientific reports cast me back in time, and I enjoyed tracking down what remains from that era as I retraced my character's footsteps. So I went to Vassar, to the observatory that Mariah Mitchell oversaw during her time there, and that she still presides over, although now as a bronze bust. I visited Edison's famous Menlo Park Laboratory, which was reconstructed by Henry Ford in Michigan. And that's where I found a tesimeter. Also in Michigan, you can find James Craig Watson's Detroit Observatory in Ann Arbor, and nearby in Ypsilanti, I tracked down the telescope he brought to Wyoming to look for Vulcan. So this telescope is the one right there, front and center, in that famous photograph. I also went to the spot where this photo was taken. You'll be disappointed to see it's a parking lot at the post office. But most of my research was done in Washington at the Library of Congress and at the National Archives, because it's here that a lot of the original documents had been stored. Crumbling envelopes and files filled with letters and telegrams and scientific reports. And remember, I told you that the government was interested in artwork of the eclipse. Well, the general public and scientists submitted their drawings and paintings of the corona, from simple pencil sketches like this one. It's even hard to see, but you can see that, again, I told you, it's like strands of silk is what you see of the corona. This is another pencil drawing. This one was actually made by the territorial governor of Wyoming at the time, John W. Hoyt. Other depictions were more elaborate. I love this watercolor. It was painted by a famous mathematician, George W. Hill, who viewed the eclipse from Denver. And I think it's just gorgeous. But Hill apologized for its lack of precision, which he blamed on, quote, my want of familiarity with the handling of artists' materials. This was the work of George Hollerith, a recent graduate of the City College of New York, who observed from Central City. And this pastel was by William F. Gardner, an instrument maker at the Naval Observatory who observed from the plains of southern Colorado. This elaborate piece of artwork was produced by a Brit, Francis Cranmore Penrose, who was an architect and amateur astronomer who came to America for the eclipse, and he painted this in Denver. And this is a particularly interesting sketch of the corona. It's actually a composite view made by the people of Denver. There were 20 volunteers in Denver who signed up for a corona drawing class. And because the eclipse was only going to last less than 3 minutes, which was hardly enough time for one person to do an accurate sketch, they were divided up into different sections. So one person would just take this quarter of the sun, and then someone else would take this quarter. And they did it in as much detail as they could, and afterwards it was combined into this composite view of the total eclipse of 1878. And this was the view from 14,000 feet up on top of Pikes Peak. as drawn by Samuel Pierpont Langley, an astronomer from the Allegheny Observatory near Pittsburgh. Well, as you could tell, it was a glorious day for a total eclipse. Despite stormy weather in the days just beforehand, July 29th found skies that were clear across Wyoming and Colorado, and it was a proud and exciting day for my three main characters. I won't give away the whole story, and I don't have time to, but Edison's tesimeter was declared a great success. Something we will remember 150 years from then, but who remembers the tesimeter? Mariah Mitchell, she made quite a splash. The folks on the frontier were impressed by the bold display of femininity and fortitude. And what about James Craig Watson, the planet hunter? He found Vulcan. So here's his star chart. There's the eclipsed sun. There's the sun and the moon together. Right there is where he's marked Vulcan. Well, the headlines were effusive. Great results, announced the Chicago paper. Most important observations ever made, said the New Yorker. It was a great day for these scientists, and it was for America too. The eclipse that crossed the frontier enabled this young country to prove to the world that it could do science. It could take on Europe. As one local boasted to a visitor from England, "Sir, Colorado can beat the world in eclipses as in everything else." The Rocky Mountain eclipse helped boost America's interest in science, and it bolstered its confidence in that realm. Now, as you may have guessed, the specific achievements of my characters did not quite pan out. Mariah Mitchell did help open the doors of science and higher education to women, but it's not like male scientists suddenly embraced their female counterparts. It was the beginning of a long, hard struggle. Watson's discovery of Vulcan, you may have surmised, was faulty. There is no planet between Mercury and the Sun, and poor Watson worked himself to death 2 years after the eclipse at age 42, pursuing a crazy scheme to prove that he'd been right. As for Edison's tesimeter, it never did live up to its hype, and Edison quickly turned to other projects. In fact, the day after Edison returned from Wyoming, he started work on a new invention. Now, there are some connections between the eclipse and the light bulb. The scientists that Edison spent time with in Wyoming encouraged him to focus on electric light and power. The time away from the laboratory left him refreshed and ready to take on new challenges. But did Edison dream up the light bulb on the shores of Battle Lake? No. The eclipse of 1878 did not illuminate America in the way the historical marker claims. However, it did enlighten America, helping to push this upstart nation toward what it soon would become, the undeniable global superpower in science, a country that would, in this intellectual realm, eclipse the world. Thank you. I'm going to turn up the light so I can see hands. So I am happy to take questions about the 1878 eclipse and the 2017 eclipse. Also, I should just mention a couple of things that I want to forget. Oh, first of all, Jana wanted me to mention that she already has books, copies of American Eclipse on order, and you can, I think, you can even reserve one now from the library when they come in early June. And as I said, before the beginning of June, there is one time and one place where the book will actually go on sale, and that is this coming Sunday. I'm going to be speaking again up at CU at the Fisk Planetarium, and Boulder Bookstore has been given permission to sell the books a month earlier. But also I would ask you, I mean, I will be giving effectively the same talk there, so I don't expect any of you to come back, but if you know anyone you think would have enjoyed being here tonight, who might want to come Sunday, please, my website is american-eclipse.com, and you'll find the details of the Fisk event there. It's 7 o'clock Sunday night, and they require tickets. And I'm happy to take questions. over here.
How big of a traffic jam do you think there'll be on I-25 that morning?
How big of a traffic jam will there be? Probably the biggest there has ever been. Well, let me put this into context. So, first of all, the total solar eclipse on August 21st, no question, will be the most witnessed total eclipse in American history. That's easy. It's probably going to be the most witnessed total eclipse in human history. And some people think it will be the biggest one-day mass migration of humans ever on Earth. I can bring up a couple of things here. Well, here, let me just, you'll probably want to know a little bit more about the August eclipse. So I'll get back to a little bit of that. So here's what's going to happen on August 21st. Here comes the moon's shadow. And at about 10:15 in the morning, it will come ashore in Oregon, and it will be going at 1,600 miles an hour across Oregon, Idaho, Wyoming, Nebraska, a little bit of Kansas, then right over half of Kansas City, half of St. Louis, smack dab over Nashville, misses Atlanta, and it leaves the U.S. Charleston, South Carolina. It'll take an hour and a half for the moon's shadow to go across the country. So here's a map of the path of totality. And it's 70 miles wide. So here we are here. So straight up I-25 would be the easiest way to get to it. And the morning of August 21st, it's just going to be mayhem. I mean, you've got towns in the path of totality who've been planning for years what they're going to do and treating it like a natural disaster. But one they can plan for. Because you have small towns that are going to, the population's going to increase tenfold or more. And is there going to be enough gas at the gas stations, and cash at the ATMs, and water on the shelves at the supermarkets, and what are the hospitals going to do for people who have heat stroke? And so it's going to be crazy. Over here.
Where will you be?
Where will I be? I will be in Jackson, Wyoming. So I made my hotel reservations 3 years ago. But there's nothing left. Unless you want to spend $1,000 a night, you might find a place. I mean, the last I heard was back in the fall, there was, I think, a Best Western in Casper that had a few rooms left. It was $500 a night, 3-night minimum. And that's basically the story all along the path of totality. So I'll be in Jackson. Jackson, because it's Jackson, it's beautiful there. And I was able to convince family members from across the country to come meet me there. Also, we are in a good part of the country because this is, the most important thing about the eclipse is you want clear skies. If it's cloudy, you'll miss the show. And so this is what, just statistically speaking, how cloudy skies usually are on August 21st. Blue is good. So basically, from Oregon to Nebraska, once you get in from the coast, is the best general area to be. Where I'll be in Wyoming, near the Tetons, is not as good as to the east. But so really central Wyoming is perfect. You want to check out the weather forecast the day before, because that's the most important thing. But statistically speaking, the skies are very clear in central Wyoming. However, my plans are to be on top of a mountain. So I'm going to be on top of Rendezvous Peak at the ski resort there. Back in September, there was a day in September when the ski resort sold tickets on the tram for Eclipse Day, and they were sold out in 20 minutes. So I'm on the 10:12 a.m. tram to the top of Rendezvous Peak, and that's where I'll be, unless the traffic is so crazy from downtown Jackson to the ski resort that I can't get there. More questions? Yeah, wait.
Since you've seen several eclipses, is the eclipse different when the solar sun cycle is at its maximum or minimum?
An educated question.
Yeah.
So the question was, since I've seen multiple eclipses, and I've seen 5 total eclipses, does it matter where in the sun's cycle, the solar cycle, it is? And it does matter. Now, so every total eclipse is different, and people might wonder, after you've seen one, why do you have to see another? Well, I was never a deadhead, but I understand the phenomenon that, you know, every concert is different. It's the same in some ways and different in other ways, and that's true of total eclipses. Everyone is different. Depending on, sometimes you'll see those flames shooting off the sun, the prominence, sometimes you don't. Depending on the angle that the moon's shadow is coming in at, or how wide it is, it might be darker or lighter, colors are different. But the most important thing is the corona, because the corona is different every time. And we're coming up on a solar minimum. And interestingly, the corona has a more interesting shape usually during the minimum. So during solar maximum, and it's an 11-year cycle approximately, during the maximum, the corona tends to be kind of just symmetrical and round. But during the solar minimum, it's more like they saw in 1878, with these big streamers coming off to the side, these wings. So I'm hoping that we'll see a really interesting corona this year. You've been wanting to ask a question right here.
2 questions, if I may, and they're at opposite ends of the existential experience. One is, are there scientific experiments going on the 21st, as there were in 1878? And on the other side of it, have you also investigated and some of the religious, superstitious, and cultural aspects of this scary phenomenon?
So the first, there are 2 questions. The first was whether any science will be going on for this. So as I said, the golden age of eclipse expeditions was the mid to late 1800s. That's when there was so little known about the sun and so much that could be discovered at each eclipse. Today, it's marginal stuff. There are still scientists who conduct studies. They will tell you it's important, and it is important, but it's now fine-tuning what we know about the corona. And so, particularly, so there are, back in the 1800s, mid-1800s, the only time you could see the corona was during a total solar eclipse. Today, NASA can watch the corona and the European Space Agency 24 hours a day. We've got spacecraft out in space looking at the sun all the time. But they can only see the outer corona. There's a middle section of the corona that still is only visible in great detail during a total eclipse. So it's one really interesting thing that's going to be done this year. It's using volunteers. It's something called Citizen CATE, C-A-T-E, Continental America Telescopic Eclipse Experiment, which there will be people lined up all along the path of totality, I think 80 different stations, with identical equipment. They'll have telescopes with video cameras, and for the 2.5 minutes of totality at each place, hopefully without clouds, they'll take a very high-resolution video of the sun. And when that's done, when the eclipse is over, they'll all be put together into one continuous 1.5-hour movie showing how the solar corona evolved in that 1.5-hour period. And the folks behind it say that that will be a first-of-its-kind movie to really see how the whole corona, from the very edge of the sun out to the very end of the edge of the corona, how it evolves. But it's that kind of, no one's going to discover something dramatically different. The other question was about superstitions. I haven't, it's not something I've looked into a great deal, but certainly, and I write a little bit about it in my book, I mean, there are plenty of stories in history of, there was a war in Central Asia that was stopped because of a total eclipse that happened in the middle of a battle that was seen as clearly the gods were angry, we better stop fighting. Holy Roman Emperor Louis the Pious, back in, I'm going to forget which century, in Europe, there was a total eclipse that passed over France, and he was particularly superstitious about astronomical events, and he just saw it as such a bad omen, he stopped eating and he died a short time later, and it plunged Europe into civil war. So, I mean, total eclipses have changed history. And even today, there are superstitions in certain places, including in the United States. People who believe that, that the sun is giving off dangerous rays, that even to stand outside, you could go blind if you're outside at the time of eclipse, or that if you're pregnant, don't go outside because you'll lose the baby, stuff like that. That, of course, is not true. Maybe a question in the back, because I see a minute back there. I'm sorry, Ray.
During the 2.5 minutes, would you advise looking at the corona through a telescope or try to photograph it, or would you just try and enjoy the moment?
So during the 2.5 minutes of totality, should you take pictures or just enjoy it? How would you do it? Well, for anyone who's never seen a total solar eclipse, I say don't do anything. Don't have equipment to bother with. Certainly don't take pictures. You don't want your recollection to be what you saw in the viewfinder. Because, first of all, you're going to drop your phone and break it because you're just going to be screaming for joy or crying or something. But also, a total eclipse, it's not something you see, it's something you feel and experience with so many senses, because so many things are happening so fast. This drop in temperature, and the birds going crazy, and the colors changing, and the shadows zooming over you. And it's just all happens so fast. But also the corona, you don't need. In fact, your best view is with the naked eye. At my 5th total eclipse, just in March of last year, I for the first time brought binoculars, and during totality, I looked at the corona with the binoculars, which was kind of interesting. You could really see these tendrils a little bit better. But you don't want to risk. Again, during totality, it is safe to look at the sun with the naked eye. Until the moment of totality, and then beginning the moment after, you don't want to do that. You could ruin your eyesight. And you don't want to be looking through a telescope or binoculars when suddenly the sun comes back out, because that could be bad for your eyes. So I say if it's your first total eclipse, just enjoy it.
Would you watch it in town, or would you try to be out where there's fewer people?
Does it make sense to view with in town or outside of town? I mean, I've tried different things, and I think it is kind of a group event. I mean, when I was in the Faroe Islands back in 2015, which is a fairly remote place, but that's where totality was going to be. I found myself on the edge of a sheep pasture in a beautiful place, and there were a few other people around, and the main thing is it was mostly cloudy. I saw the corona for 2 seconds. But I actually missed having other people there. There's something about that group spirit. I think one of my strongest memories was in 1999. There was a total eclipse that crossed Europe, and I was on the roof of a hotel in Munich, and just like the folks in Central City back in 1878. And one of my greatest memories was this enormous cheer of tens of thousands of people on rooftops and streets all across the city as the moon's shadow came in. It just, this humanity's reaction to the shadow of the moon was really stunning. But there's no wrong way to do it, as long as you have a view of where the sun is. And it's good to have as much of a view of the horizon as possible. For this eclipse, the sun will be high in the sky. There's little chance that you'll miss where the sun is. But if you can see more of the horizon, you'll be able to see that 360-degree sunset effect. You'll see, I forget which planets will be up, but you may see more planets if you can see more of the sky. Back there. Yeah.
Can you tell us anything about what wildlife is doing during the eclipse?
Yeah, wildlife's reaction. Well, animals definitely get a little confused. it's generally said, farmers say that, you know, the cows will start heading home, and the roosters, the chickens will head home to roost, that sort of thing. And you definitely see in those weird few minutes before the onset of totality, it's like a sudden, it's like suddenly it's becoming twilight, and the birds just don't know what to do, and they'll be flying around. I know in 1878 there were reports of grasshoppers suddenly folding their wings and falling to the ground. But you definitely want to keep an eye on what the animals are doing. Over here.
Yeah, I'm just curious, the people who walked in here tonight thinking they didn't have plans for August, are they thinking?
And I hope so, because, so, a key thing is, okay, so this is a map showing the path of totality, and then these lines are showing the degrees of partial eclipse. So this is 90% partial, 80% partial, 70%. So where we are, Denver and Boulder will be more than 90%. I think around here, 94% maybe partial eclipse. And so people will understandably say, oh, 94%. That's 94% as good as being in the path of totality. No. No. And it's not just me saying that. So, let's take a 90% partial eclipse. A 90% partial eclipse, you can never take off the eclipse glasses, right? You won't see the corona. You won't see planets. You might see Venus, I suppose. But the main thing is, and daylight will look the same. You'll see those weird crescent shadows under trees. That'll be neat. But it won't look all that dark. It's no darker than a cloudy day. And it will have gotten dark so gradually you wouldn't notice it. And at the height, so 90% partial eclipse, you still have 10% of the sun. So the sun is still 10% as bright as it is on a normal day. In the path of totality, daylight drops by a factor of 1,000,000. So it's not 90% as good. A 90% partial eclipse, it's not 90% as good. A total eclipse, it's not 10% as good. It's not even a tenth of a percent as good. It's 1/100,000th of what you'll experience. The difference between a 10% of daylight and 1/1,000,000. That's the difference. And the difference occurs in those final minutes and seconds. So even if you're in the path of totality, you'll be looking at your watch and saying, you know, it's almost total, and I don't know what that author was talking about. It doesn't seem that dramatic. And then it's like falling down a well. And then suddenly you've woken up in another place. And then when it's over, you think, did that really happen? Way in the back over here.
One question and one comment. Will the associated lunar eclipse on August 9th also be total?
Will the lunar eclipse on August 9th be total? You know, I don't know. I don't know. So, so eclipses occur in eclipse seasons, and often when you have a solar eclipse 2 weeks before or 2 weeks after, you'll have a lunar eclipse and vice versa. But I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that question.
My comment is during the total solar eclipse, Mercury will be retrograde, so that means delays in balance and communication and transportation. You probably give yourself extra time. I don't know anything about Mercury retrograde.
All right. I'm happy to take a couple more questions. Yes, back there.
What was the follow-up on the planet Vulcan?
What was the follow-up on the planet Vulcan? Well, interestingly, so the story of Vulcan, and there are a couple of books that have been written about Vulcan, because the 1878 eclipse was key event in that long story, but it goes from like the 1850s to 1919, and it was 1919 when the mystery was solved, and it was Albert Einstein who solved it. Because, and in fact, this solution was proven to be correct at a total eclipse. So the reason Mercury's orbit seemed weird back in the 1800s was because it doesn't quite fit Newton's theory of gravity. Because it's so close to the sun, relativistic effects start to take over. But who knew about relativity? It wasn't until Albert Einstein came up with his general theory of relativity, showing that gravity warps space-time, and that it was Einstein who was able to explain that using relativity, Mercury's orbit actually made sense. You didn't need a mass between Mercury and the sun to account for its orbit. And so anyway, but then the eclipse in 1919, that was what proved Einstein right. At a total eclipse in 1919, Arthur Eddington, a British astronomer, conducted an experiment where during totality, he looked at the position of stars on either side of the eclipsed sun. And what he found was that the starlight, as it went near the sun, was bent by the gravity. And it fit Einstein's calculation, and that showed that Einstein was right. There was no need for Vulcan anymore. And so now we don't even look for Vulcan. Yeah.
Do you know if NASA is planning any airborne investigations?
Is NASA planning any airborne investigations? I don't know, but it doesn't help you all that much. I mean, getting higher up in the atmosphere, you might see more of the corona, but
you can extend the totality by
correct.
a lot.
You can extend the totality some. So again, the ground speed of the shadow, I think, will be 1,600 miles an hour. So you can extend totality by a few minutes, I suppose, in a really fast airplane. And during some past eclipses, that has been done. And I don't know for sure if NASA's doing it this time. Oh, sorry, over here you didn't ask a question. Yeah.
Would streetlights be a problem?
Will streetlights be a problem? Not really. I mean, you'll have a better view without them, but the corona is about as bright as a full moon. So light pollution's not going to be a problem. I mean, it may just detract from the beauty of it, but it's not going to interfere in any significant way with what you can see. But the more you get away from lights, and in fact, the more you dark adapt your eyes, the better. What some people do, I have yet to try, and I don't think you should try for your first total eclipse. You should just keep things simple. But what some people do is they'll put a patch over one eye and keep that on it for like 20 minutes until totality, and then pull it off. So one eye is really dark adapted to really make out the fine structure of the corona. But then some people say they get dizzy because one eye can see so much. I'm sorry, yes?
What time is totality going to be where you are planning on?
Yeah, what time will totality be? So where I'll be in Jackson, I think it's at 11:34 in the morning. So the partial eclipse will start about an hour and a quarter before that. I think around 10:15, 10:10. The partial eclipse will begin. So again, there's a good long period until totality. Totality then is about 2.5 minutes. And then afterwards, you've got another hour and a half of partial eclipse. But at that point, no one cares.
In this part of the world, you need to be off of the peaks by noon because of the lightning strike danger. Are you guys going to carry your funnels, your strainers, whatever?
Right. The question was about the danger of thunderstorms. Well, that's certainly something to be aware of. I mean, hopefully where I will be, I've never been to the top of Rendezvous Peak, but I understand there's a little eatery called Corbett's Cabin. Has anyone ever been there? They say they're supposed to have great waffles. So I'm sure there will be more people up there that can fit into Corbett's Cabin. there may be a place to hide out. However, interestingly, keep in mind that the amount of solar radiation will be dramatically reduced late morning. And so the buildup of thunderstorms will probably be reduced as well.
You should take my husband with you, he's really tall.
Thank you. Jan, I should ask Jan if I'm happy to answer a few more questions, but you.
Why don't you take a couple more?
Some of you probably have to head out. Why don't I take a couple more, and then I'm happy to stick around for anyone else who's got questions. Yeah.
How much time have you accumulated in the shadow of the moon?
How much? Well, you want to know for sure. I can tell you. They, actually, let's see.
What is that?
Oh, that's Yosemite. I didn't show that. I was going to see. Well, anyway, it's not worth it. I was going to go to a website called eclipsechasers.com. Eclipse-chasers.com. And so people can actually enter an Eclipse Chasers blog, and you'll find me on there. All the eclipses I've seen, and it calculates how much time you spent in the shadow of the moon. And I think I'm up to a little over 11 minutes total.
And
But
how many eclipses?
5 total. Yeah. But but there are, I'm a novice when it comes to eclipse chasing. So, I know folks who see 10, 15, 20, and that takes a long time to accumulate that many. And then you've got to go really crazy places, like Antarctica, or the middle of the ocean on a cruise ship where it never even touches land. I go to ones I can get to affordably. Anyway, at eclipsechasers.com, you can see where you rank. I'm near the bottom.
Did you see the one in July 11, 1991?
July 11, 1991, no.
Almost 7 minutes.
That was the one in Baja, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, that was one I wish I had seen. Yeah. Yes. So the longest eclipses can last just over 7 minutes. Those are really rare. Most are under 3.
Yeah.
So maybe one more question, and then again, I'll stick around, but I'll let the others go. Anyone who hasn't asked a question who wants to ask one? Yeah.
After this one, when's the next USA eclipse?
Oh, I'm glad you asked that. So, as I say, it's been 99 years since a total eclipse last crossed the entire width of the United States. However, 38 years ago, there was one that crossed a little bit of the Pacific Northwest. Went from Oregon up to Montana. But we've been we've been in this eclipse drought, which is about to end, relatively speaking. So, in 2024, April 8th, will be our next total eclipse. And that one, the path of totality runs from Texas up to Maine. But the one I'm waiting for is 2045. And it's in July, I think. I should know the date. But that will cross Colorado. It'll go from California to Florida. And Mrs. Boulder, actually, I checked. The next total eclipse that will cross my house in Boulder will be in 2772. But the 2045 one, that I hope to be around. Anyway, thank you all so much again.